Welcome to the All Things Nintendo podcast. I'm Brian Shea from Game Informer, and this is a weekly podcast to discuss all the biggest news and games from the world of Nintendo. There isn't a whole lot going on this week, so we are going to skip the traditional news segment and spend that portion of today's show looking at Nintendo's 2023 so far. Then during the main segment, we're going to get a review of Oxenfree II. Joining me for all that is Game Informer's Wesley LeBlanc. Wes, how's it going?
It's going good. I'm excited to be back and talk about a game I really enjoyed.
Yeah, for a while there, it was like the Brian and Wesley show. You were on pretty frequently, and it's been a few weeks. I think that was almost intentional for me at first, where I was like, all right, I've had Wes on way too often. Like,
you violently booted me from it. Yeah, you were like, you're done, you're cut.
You were begging me to come back. No, I wanted to be respectful of your time. You're a busy guy too. Like, we're all busy at Game Informer, but like you have a tendency to get fairly busy fairly quickly. So I didn't want to keep taking up an hour and a half to 2.5 hours of your week every single week. So
you couldn't keep me away for long. I'm back.
So like I said at the top, there wasn't a whole lot going on this week in terms of news for games coming to Nintendo Switch or Nintendo games themselves. So I thought this was a good opportunity for us to do what we were not able to do in the first couple weeks of July, or the last couple of weeks, end of June, beginning of July. And that is, we're going to look back at how Nintendo is doing since we are at just past the halfway point of 2023. So before we jump in and kind of run down the first half of 2023 for Nintendo, what comes to mind when you first think of that first half of the 2023 campaign?
So I feel like everybody, 99% of people are going to have the same answer. But my answer, I think, is different. It's actually going to be Fire Emblem Engage. I should preface that with saying I am only like 15 hours into Zelda because I've been busy with other games. So, Zelda's not at the top of my mind. But Fire Emblem Engage was probably one of my favorite games this year. It's got I think the highest score I've given a game this year. And I really, really loved it.
Yeah, I know you were really high on that game, and it's like a lot of people almost forgot that it came out this year.
Yeah, it was I think early February.
It was January.
Okay, yeah, January is, that's might as well been 10 years ago in 2023. This year's wild.
Are there any like emerging storylines that you think of, like themes or anything like that you see when you look at Nintendo's 2023 to this point?
I feel like it's weird now because I'm painting like the whole year's picture, even though we haven't gotten Mario and whatnot yet. But 2023 for me has really felt like the Switch's last hurrah. And part of that is that I want it to be the Switch's last hurrah because I'm ready for what's next. But also we got a big new Fire Emblem that was a return to form for what fans wanted of classic Fire Emblem. We got Tears of the Kingdom, which is the follow-up to the year one Switch game. We have a new 2D Mario, finally, our first new 2D Mario this gen. It kind of feels like the Switch is reminding us of what it is, which is a powerhouse console that is in the hands of millions of people and has some really great games, and also like we're going out with a bang. And I feel like that's kind of been Nintendo's message to me as a Switch player this year.
Yeah, and it does kind of feel like this might be the final strong year of the Switch. There's like a feeling in the air. I don't really have like any like substance to back that up, but that's what it kind of feels like to me. It's like, all right, well, we got Breath of the Wild on day one with the Nintendo Switch. Let's get Tears of the Kingdom out. And then, Super Mario Brothers Wonder looks like an all new thing that it's not really like the new AAA Mario game that we kind of were expecting, but it does look like something that's going to be fun and unique. But I'm wondering if maybe there is a AAA Mario game that's being developed in tandem with this one that will be a launch title for whatever Nintendo has next. That's almost my takeaway.
Because we're not going to have Zelda on day one. I mean, we might get like a port or something, but we're not going to have a big Breath of the Wild type game like we did with Switch. So a Mario Odyssey 2 or whatever they call it makes sense to me.
Oh, absolutely. So let's run down the year. I mean, I don't want to dwell too much unless there's anything that pops up that you really want to speak on. But we're just going to run down the first 6 months of Nintendo's 2023 and just the bigger games that came to. I mean, there's obviously more games than what we're going to talk about that did come to Switch. I mean, just look at the eShop. There's hundreds upon hundreds of games that I feel hit every single month. We are not going to do that. there's only 3 games that I want to talk about in January. I guess 4. One of them, 2 of them are kind of lumped into one release. But January brought us Persona 4 Golden and Persona 3 Portable. Those are the ones that were lumped into one release. Fire Emblem Engage, and then we also got GoldenEye 007 from the
Oh
N64
yeah,
days.
that was
Brought
January.
That was.
Oh my gosh, crazy.
So you may recall that GoldenEye 007 came as kind of part of an agreement between Microsoft and Nintendo, where Xbox got kind of like the enhanced edition with like the modern controls and up-res textures and everything.
Yeah,
And the Switch got kind of the more faithful N64 version where like, it's kind of the standard N64 controls and everything, but you do get the online play, which isn't through the game itself. It's just purely through the Nintendo Switch Online N64 capabilities that exist with all of their games. So it is kind of a cool release in that it was like cooperatively released on both Xbox and Switch because, Xbox owns Rare. So
yeah.
that was kind of the story behind that. But you already talked about your love of Fire Emblem Engage. Do either of the other releases in January really warrant any further discussion?
Probably not for me, only because literally I played Fire Emblem Gage all of January.
Mm-hmm.
I dabbled in GoldenEye, and it was my first time ever playing it. And I think it's one of those like you have to be there type games for me
It was a
because
time and place thing for sure.
yeah, and it just wasn't. And I mean, multiplayer was the big thing that people loved. So just playing the single player didn't really do anything for me. I'm more of a Agent Under Fire on PS2 kind of guy.
Well, that's unfortunate. But GoldenEye 007, it really changed the landscape back when it released in the 90s of like, everybody was like, oh, well, if you're going to play an FPS, it's got to be on the PC. That's the only way to play an FPS. And GoldenEye was like, well, here's a really great FPS that you can play that's not only a cool single player game, but also has an amazing multiplayer component that unfortunately it sounds like you're not able to fully enjoy given the limitations of this release. I mean, Kyle and I played a little bit of the multiplayer, and it was fun.
Well, it must be
It's
nice to have friends, Brian.
well, you have coworkers if nothing else. We all have Nintendo Switches.
That's true. That's true. No, I just I played like the first 2 levels, and I was like, it's not really for me.
Yeah, and Persona 4 Golden, I do really want to sing the praises of that release coming to Switch. Persona 3 Portable, not so much. Persona 4 Golden, one of the greatest RPGs of this century. I feel comfortable saying that. I think Persona
Yeah,
5 is a better RPG. Persona 4 Golden, I've talked about it on the show before where I kind of slept on it when it came to Vita. Everybody was like, oh my God, we're getting the definitive version on Vita. So I bought it day one when it came to Vita. And I played it for about an hour and a half, 2 hours, and put it down. I was like, this might not be for me. It's way too text heavy. I don't even know if I'm going to like the game. I'm sitting through a visual novel right now.
yeah.
I put it away, didn't ever look back. And then I played Persona 5 on PS4 when it first came out in 2017. Absolutely enamored by it. So that ultimately, once I finished Persona 5, I went back and played Persona 4 Golden and adored it. I loved it once I finally pushed through that slow intro,
hmm
and
The
I'm
gap
happy
is
that it's on
not
Switch.
the gap's not big between 5 and 4, which is wild because the games are over a decade apart. I played 4 Golden on Vita as well, and I do like 5 more. But like, it's shocking how well Persona has nailed what it is throughout time. Like going as far back as 2, Persona has known what it is and has done really well at being that. And now every new Persona is just kind of like them celebrating themselves more, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and Persona 3 Portable, I know there are some defenders of this version of the game.
Yeah.
It just feels like half-hearted the way they ported it to Switch. Like when I played it, at least I started it, and the voice lines were getting cut off, and it just sucks that like we got the PSP version of this game because it like the cutscenes are just basically like stills. They're not like
Yeah.
I don't know. It just felt like why did we not get like at least an upgraded version of this other? Because there were like what 3 versions? There was Persona 3, there was
FES and then
Fez
portable.
and
Yeah.
Portable, and it's like I feel like if there was some way that they could have combined all the features of one and into one, that would have been the ideal version. I know that they are doing a Persona 3 remake now. I think that's coming out next year,
But
but
that
it's not
still
coming to
doesn't,
Switch.
and it still doesn't combine those. Like it's not going to have the female protagonist side of things, which
Isn't it? Come
yeah.
on. They're going to do that as paid DLC, almost
Oh,
certainly.
that would be. I mean, people would eat it up, myself included. But like, that's so greedy in
I
my
mean, that's
opinion.
my prediction. I don't. They
Yeah,
haven't said anything, but I would be shocked if they didn't like put this out, put the Persona 3 remake out, which again is not coming to Switch. So the Switch owners are stuck with Persona 3 Portable. However, I bet they're going to put out Persona 3 remake. People are going to play through it. They're going to give people like 6 months, and then they're going to maybe at E3 or Summer Game Fest, I guess, they're going to announce that like, oh, the playable female protagonist is getting added as like a $10 DLC, because
or they'll
doesn't
just
that
say
also
Persona
changes a lot,
3
right?
Royal or something, and then charge us
Oh,
$60
that's
for
true.
that DLC,
Yeah, that's possible as
and
well.
on Switch. Yeah,
All right, so let's move on to February. There's a lot of games that came out this February, and again, I'm going to rattle them off. I know that there's a couple you're probably going to want to talk about. There's a couple I want to talk about: The Pathless, Metroid Prime Remastered, Theater Rhythm Final Bar Line, Kirby's Return to Dreamland Deluxe, Octopath Traveler 2, and Ritmos. So I know the two that you probably want to talk about, and there are two that you reviewed for us. But which one do you want
yeah.
to start with?
I'll start with Ritmos because I still play around with that game every now and then. I don't even remember why I picked it up. I think it just like was one of those instances where PR was like, "Hey, we think you might like this game. Here's a code," and I played it, and it was one of those I beat it in 2 sessions kind of games. But yeah, just a fun little rhythm game with like a special emphasis on the musicality of rhythm. Like the team clearly knows or put in the work to like research the different instruments and the different eras of music going back as like 1960s Ethiopian jazz and just like fun different types of music you don't typically hear in rhythm games. And I really appreciated that as someone who like plays music. And it was also like 4 to 5 hours long. Great puzzles, great little rhythm puzzles. Took me an evening or 2 evenings to beat. And every time you unlock an instrument, you can like kind of create your own tracks with it. They have like a loop track thing built into the game. And so it's fun to just mess around with that every now and then.
Yeah,
It's always
it's
fun with the little when a little indie game like that comes through and shines bright.
it seemed like a very cool game the way you were describing it. It's on my list of games I want to play before we get to kind of like the end of the year, so we can talk about like the best games of 2023. So
Mhm.
I'm glad that you actually did take the time to go through that, because it it just added to my pile of games I need to check out, which I'm still making my way through one of your favorite games of the year, which is Final Fantasy 16.
Yeah.
And it's just hard because I've been reviewing other games, so it's like a lot of my free time has been going to those games, and also life is busy as well. So
Yeah,
it's
no, this year is like it's an onslaught. I don't want to say it now, but like I do think 2023 could be one of the best years in gaming if the rest of the year pans out as well as this first half. It's I feel obliterated in the best way as a gamer.
oh, for sure. There are so many great games that have already come out as we're talking about on this segment, and then so many still to come, even outside the world of Nintendo. I mean, when you look at things like Alan Wake 2 and Spider-Man 2,
Starfield.
Starfield, it's just like, man. And also, like, worth noting, when October rolls around, or yeah, October, right? That's when
Yeah,
Spider-Man 2, Alan Wake 2, and Super Mario Brothers Wonder all come out within like three
same
days of
week.
each other.
Mhm.
Yeah, we're going to be drowning, but in a good way, I guess.
Yeah.
Except for us, we're going to be drowning in a bad way. The people who cover this industry professionally, we're going to be drowning in kind of the bad way. But all us as gamers are going to be drowning in a good way.
Yeah, it'll be busy for sure.
So the one that I want to talk about first is Metroid Prime Remastered. Actually, let me just lump both of these in to the same talking point: Metroid Prime Remastered and Kirby's Return to Dreamland Deluxe. Both of these are remasters of previous games from Nintendo's catalog. Metroid Prime obviously was a GameCube game. Kirby's Return to Dreamland was a Wii title. Both of these have received upgraded textures and HD treatments and everything. And Kirby's Return to Dreamland Deluxe is the lesser of the upgrades, but it's still a pretty successful upgrade. Added a whole epilogue, added some new powers for Kirby, and it's already a very good game. So I was happy with that. I think I gave it like an 8.5 or an 8.75. Like it's a very solid Kirby 2D side scroller, and I'm happy that it exists on the Switch. However, if we're talking remastered games that came out on Switch in February, you can't do better than Metroid Prime Remastered. That game looks so much better. They redid the visuals. They redid the controls to play like a modern FPS. Like there are some spots around that like it makes you feel like, all right, this is an older game. This is a 20-year-old game.
Hmm.
But if you told an uninformed person, like somebody who'd never heard of Metroid Prime, and you said, "Hey, this is this brand new game called Metroid Prime. It just came out on Switch this year." Somebody could pick it up and realistically be fooled that this is a new game on Switch
Oh
because it
yeah, for
looks and
sure.
plays that well.
And it's just a remaster technically, which is wild. Like I know a lot of people are like, why are they calling this remaster? This feels so much more than what we typically refer to as remaster.
I mean, it almost feels like they should have gone the other way with this. Like call it Metroid Prime Deluxe and Kirby's
Yeah.
Return to Dreamland Remastered.
Right? Yeah. Yeah.
But no, so those are the two I wanted to shout at, and I know that you have a lot of love for this last game, which is Theater Rhythm Final Bar Line.
Yes, yeah, another one of my higher reviewed games this year. I think I gave it a 9, maybe even a 9.5. I don't remember. But gosh, yeah, I've loved the Theater Rhythm series since its inception. I just love Final Fantasy music. I think it's the best catalog of music in all of games. And then to get to play this version, which is clearly the definitive version of that series, with music from games that came out between like the last one on 3DS and this one, it was just so fun. It's still a game I play pretty much every month. Like if I'm on a plane, that's the game I'm playing. It's relaxing, it's calming, it's fun, it's pretty, and yeah, I adore it. I adore every aspect of the game. The multiplayer stuff is a little hit or miss for me, but I don't really. That's not what I'm there for. I'm there to play some Final Fantasy music, and it's a game that has stuck with me throughout this year.
And they keep releasing new music from other
Yeah,
Square Enix franchises. Like we just got the Saga stuff not too long ago. I think
Chrono
Nier was also.
Trigger, Near, yeah,
Yeah, they're doing a great job of supporting that title, and obviously the amazing catalog of Final Fantasy music is
yeah.
present and accounted for. And
And now we've got 16. I'd love to see them add some 16 DLC.
that would be, I mean, that's the logical next step, right? Like after they
Yeah,
get through like this, like, oh, we're gonna do other franchises. I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of the year we get some 16 music,
I
but we'll
hope.
see. That it would be so weird if they didn't.
Yeah, it would.
Let's move on to March. I again, two games I want to shout out here, but I'm going to run down the ones that I think are noteworthy that hit Switch in March, and that is Dead Cells: Return to Castlevania, Legend of Heroes: Trails to Azure, Bayonetta Origins: Syriza and the Lost Demon, MLB The Show 23, and Dredge. So, do any of these stick out as ones you want to talk about?
I didn't actually play any of these, but I think Origins, Bayonetta Origins, is worth mentioning. I remember people not being so hot on that game going into it, just because it's not really what you want out of a Bayonetta. And I know like quite a few people who really, really loved that game. Um, and I just thought it's fun to see a company take big swings like that in terms of gameplay with a
Hmm.
storied franchise like Bayonetta, and then it just pays off in dividends. Like to go up against the people that were like, "This is not what we want from this franchise," and then be like, "No, actually, it is what you want." It's always fun to see companies do that.
So, I did not actually play it either, but I do know that it seemed to change a lot of hearts and minds when it finally did come out.
Yeah.
Another one I didn't play, but I think bears mentioning is Dredge, because that
Yes.
game blew up for a little bit there. I've played a very little bit of it to the point that I was just like, I don't know if this is necessarily for me, but it's kind of a new twist on like the fishing genre where you're going out and like catching kind of like Lovecraftian horrors and bringing them back and selling them. And yeah, it's a very fun indie game for people who can kind of get into the loop. And I know plenty of people who have gotten kind of just completely absorbed by that game.
Yeah.
The two that I wanted to shout out, I mean, it should be no surprise, but MLB The Show 23, I reviewed that for us on PS5. Obviously, the Switch version is not going to be nearly as impressive. I think it's based on the last gen version anyway, and even then, it's kind of like a down-resed version of that. But from what I played of the Switch version, it does run pretty well. And if you're looking for an MLB game on the go, it's very competent. It did have my Switch kind of humming a little bit in terms of like that fan, so it might be kind of pushing the Switch to its limit, but it didn't seem like it was really like having too many hiccups or anything, at least the limited amount that I did play, just to make sure that it wasn't a broken mess. And then the one that was my favorite of the month was Dead Cells: Return to Castlevania. that got me full on back into Dead Cells. I loved every moment of playing the Castlevania expansion, and man, Dead Cells is just a special game. And that expansion was so good. I've talked in the past about how Castlevania was one of the very first video games I ever played. Period. Back in the NES days. So to have Dead Cells, which takes so many cues from the Castlevania franchise, paying direct homage to the franchise that basically made it, that's just an awesome combination, and I really think that people should check that out if they have not already. And they sell it as like a full bundle where you can get like the Dead Cells Return to Castlevania bundle, and it includes
Yeah.
I think all of the expansions to this point. And it's like I want to say it's like $40. I might be wrong on that, but it's reasonable for all the content that you get.
Yeah,
So
they've been
shout out to
supporting that
that.
game for like what, 7 years now or something?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know if that's the last expansion. I think they might have like a couple more in them, but it's just a terrific package and so much content at this point, in one of the best roguelite games I've ever played. So let's move on to April. Run down this list real quick. There's not a whole lot that I want to talk about personally, but there's a couple that I imagine you'll want to. So there's Mega Man Battle Network Legacy Collection, Final Fantasy Pixel Remaster Series, Advance Wars 1+2 Reboot Camp, Strayed Lights, Desta, The Memories Between, and Bramble, the Mountain King. So I'm
Ooh,
going to set
okay.
you up here because I know you liked Strayed Lights. So tell people
Yeah.
why that is a solid game if they missed that episode.
So Strayed Lights is another one of those games that kind of just came through my email, and I was like, yeah, I'll try it out. And I ended up beating it. I think I beat that one in like one sitting. It was like 5 or 6 hours, but it was that good that I wanted to play for 6 hours straight. Um, Basically, it's like this really pretty alien-esque game. Like you're a little light ember thing on a planet that's very alien to you. Lots of beautiful hues of purple and pink and neon. And the focus is really just like this unique combat where enemies can be orange or blue, and you can transform in your little ember into orange or blue, and you need to do that to match their attacks. So not only are you trying to parry and like keep up with them in offense, but you also need to switch colors on the fly to match their offensive moves. And as someone who like really enjoys that type of combat, like parrying and dodging and whatnot, kind of like the Soulsborne-esque stuff, it was fun to see a new twist on that formula where you're parrying and you're dodging, but you also need to like keep up with that whole nother mechanic, which is switching the colors. Really fun score. I want to say off the top, I think it was Austin Wintry that did that score, or maybe somebody associated with him, but he's the guy that did Journey.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Austin is very talented.
yes, he's awesome. Great little game. If you're looking for a fun weekend game to play at night, it's perfect. It's a good time.
Yeah, and your description of it sold me on it, and I went to go check it out. And of course, it's just on my pile of games that I need to
Yeah.
still play because so many things have hit this year. And around that time was when we received advanced codes for Tears of the Kingdom, which just absorbed my life for a few weeks
Yeah.
there. The ones that I want to shout out are Final Fantasy Pixel Remaster Series. I briefly checked those out. I know that some people still have problems with the way that these are presented, and of course, I would rather them be just remade in the HD 2D style, but that's probably a lot more work than
Yeah.
just these pixel remasters are. But I'm happy that we have Final Fantasy 1 through 6 now on Switch. That's amazing. Um, and Advance Wars 1+2 Reboot Camp. It's one that I only played a little bit of, but it's a really great remake of those games. Those two amazing turn-based strategy titles from the Game Boy Advance. So those are two that I think are worth checking out, and two that are very noteworthy. I know for a while there you were talking about Bramble the Mountain King.
Yeah.
Did you play a whole lot of that?
I didn't get to play too much. I did an NGT of it, which you can watch on Game Informer's YouTube channel. It's one I want to go back to, but it's kind of like Little Nightmares esque in terms of gameplay, but it's about like I want to say Norwegian folklore or Nordic folklore,
Hmm.
and it's very visually distinct and violent as a result. Like it's not like the folklore that like a Disney movie gets made out of. It's the kind where like parents tell their kids this to scare the kids from going into the woods without supervision. There's like trolls just like tearing kids in half and all kinds of like very violent but fun stuff like that. And it's one I want to get back to. It seems like a lot of fun, and it's kind of right up my alley. But yeah, I haven't actually beaten it yet.
Yeah, the way you were describing it sounded really neat, and I didn't even get around to downloading this one like I did with Strayed Lights. It's just like maybe one day.
We need a year off. We need a year off from games. Like every
Yes.
developer should stop in 2024.
No, don't tell them that. It's basically what's going to be happening in Hollywood with the actors and writers
Yeah.
both on strike now. Oh boy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So May, uh, pretty big crater here because this is the year or the month that The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom came out. We have talked at length about that game, pretty much two entire episodes devoted to that, our thoughts on Tears of the Kingdom. But outside of that, there was Super Dungeon Maker, which is basically like Mario Maker for like a Zelda style game. It's not Nintendo developed, but it was an indie developer that put out basically a Mario Maker style Zelda game, which
Mm-hmm.
I fooled around with it a little bit. It's a little unintuitive at first with the gamepad. I'm imagining that the tools were developed for mouse and keyboard, but I was able to make like a cool little thing and with somewhat minimal effort. And I would imagine if I was able to devote the time that I wanted to devote to it, I would be able to make a lot cooler stuff.
So you're telling me
Um,
making a Zelda dungeon is easy and Nintendo doesn't deserve praise?
I'm saying that they gave us pretty decent tools. Maybe not as intuitive as Mario Makers, but yeah, Super Dungeon Maker seems like a fun little like non Zelda Maker but totally Zelda Maker game.
Yeah.
We also got a Switch port of the Dark Pictures anthology Man of Medan, and then Lego 2K Drive. So I guess we'll just start with Tears of the Kingdom. You said you're about 15 hours in. What are your thoughts on that game overall so far?
I really like it, but it came out at an extremely, or like I got around to it in a pretty overwhelming period of my life, which I basically have just described as the great Final Fantasy 16 of 2023 because I did the cover story and I went to Tokyo for that. I came back and wrote my biggest cover story, and then I wrote like 24 features for our online hub. And then right when I finished that up, I got code for the game, which was right about when I was going to start playing Zelda. So I kind of played. I tried to play some Zelda like alongside Final Fantasy, but that game turned out to be pretty big, so I just ended up devoting all my time. And now I'm still like in the catch up phase. But those 15 hours I played of Zelda, I really, really enjoy. I'm not sure yet if I am sold on it more than I was Breath of the Wild, but I don't know. That's because I'm thinking about my 150 hours with Breath of the Wild versus 15 hours in Tears. I'm not very good at like building in any game. I just don't have the creativity for that. And so it's a little overwhelming trying to learn these systems. But everything I've read about the game says like, yeah, those first 20 hours can be somewhat tough because you really got to get a handle on the systems at play here. But then it like kind of just clicks into place. And I'm looking forward to getting to that section. That said, everything outside of the new abilities with his arm, I'm loving it. It's so good to be back in this world. And yeah, it's great. I mean, it's the sequel to the Breath of the Wild. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm having this kind of struggle internally where after I finish Tears of the Kingdom, which I'm still playing around in the world, I'm not really like obviously I've beaten the game and rolled credits, but like still playing around in the world, I'm like, man, I think this is a better game than Breath of the Wild. But do I want to consider this my favorite game of all time? Because Breath of the Wild currently occupies that. Like,
Ah,
I
yeah.
think that the feeling that Breath of the Wild gave me when it first came out will be very difficult to top. Whereas Tears of the Kingdom, I may be able to objectively say it is a better game than Breath of the Wild, but I don't think that. I think because Breath of the Wild came before it, Tears of the Kingdom's impact on me personally was lessened. So it's kind of like this internal struggle of like, all right, well, can I acknowledge this game is better while still saying that Breath of the Wild is my favorite game of all time? When like I think about it and I'm like, I think I would rather replay Tears of the Kingdom than replay Breath of the Wild right now.
Yeah.
And
That's
it's tough to kind of reconcile that.
it's fun. I get that for sure. I am in the camp of like my favorite game of all time is Final Fantasy 13, which is like nowhere near the best Final Fantasy, or even like one of the best games I've played. But it's funny how we like intrinsically tie so much more that happens outside of the game to our favorite games of all time. Like for you, I imagine it's you're a Nintendo guy. It's the launch of a new Nintendo console. You're playing this game that's wildly different from the Zelda you've played for years. And so, like, yes, not only is Breath of the Wild a great game, but it's also like its time and place has such an impact on what you feel about that game, which is kind of how I am with Final Fantasy 13. It's the first one I bought with my own money and played through by myself. Like, there's so much more outside of the game that goes into picking our favorite games. So it's weird whenever a sequel like Tears of the Kingdom comes out where it's clearly better, but you're like, I don't know if it takes the top spot though.
It's so hard because I just oh man, like because I even went back 4 years after Breath of the Wild came out. I was even thinking that in my head. Like, all right, did I really love this game that much? Or was it just like, oh, I'm so excited to have a new Zelda game that challenges like kind of the conventions of the Zelda franchise? And it's also on a brand new system. Like, and did I get just like overly excited with like what I thought about Breath of the Wild? And I played it 4 years after release, and I was like, no, this is every bit as special as I thought it was when it first came out.
Yeah.
And I even wrote a feature about that on GameInformer.com. So it's going to be a struggle for me. I think Tears of the Kingdom, it still deserves like a very high spot on my favorite games of all time, and it's impossible to overstate its impact in the gaming landscape as a whole this year. And I
Yeah.
mean, it's going to be hard to think of anything that could realistically challenge it in terms of like not only game of the year, but also like the biggest story of 2023.
Hmm.
Like it's just taken over social media. It's taken over so many people's lives. Like I was listening to like podcasts that have nothing to do with gaming, and they're bringing up Tears of the Kingdom. Like that's when you know that a game has like transcended just like the games industry, right?
Oh
Like
yeah, there's like
what
celebrities out there. I mean, not to say celebrities can't be gamers too, but like I've seen celebrities who otherwise tweet about wrestling or music that they make of them playing Tears of the Kingdom, which is wild.
I mean, I think it was Alexandria Ocasio Cortez who just had like this on Blue Sky. At one point, she had like a post that just said like "Eat, sleep, Tears of the Kingdom" or something like that. I'm like, that's
That's
amazing.
awesome. Yeah.
But one other one that I did want to bring up in the month of May was one that I don't know if you played the final version, but you went to a preview event for this game, Lego
Yeah.
2K Drive. Talk to me
Yeah.
a little bit about that one because I have not dived into this one yet.
So it's weird. They kind of released Lego 2K Drive as if it's not going to be a great game. Like they kind of dropped it out of nowhere. The way they sent out codes is strange. There wasn't like too much press around the like launch of the game, but it's like a pretty great racing game. I haven't beaten it or anything. I'm playing some of it on PlayStation 5 with my nephew who's 8, and it's a lot of fun. It has the charm and humor that you've come to expect out of Lego, which is my nephew laughs at some jokes and I laugh at other ones that go over his head. There's water racing. You can like if you're off track, your car transforms into like an ATV, and then if you go into water, it transforms into a boat, and it does that throughout races and throughout the open world. And it's just so fun to watch the Lego cars build themselves back up, like with the bricks and stuff. Um, it's if I told you open world Lego racing game is good, it's exactly what you'd imagine. I mean, it's not doing anything too wild here, but I don't know. There's something special about an entire game made of Legos. It never gets old to see that.
And how much building is in that? Because you specifically told me you don't really like building stuff in
Yeah.
games.
So you can get crazy with building and build all kinds of stuff, and players can upload their creations and all that. Or you can just kind of buy cars that you want. You can't build a car that isn't drivable. Like they have parameters in the building where, like, okay, if this works, that it will be drivable on a track. So there's no fear there. But yeah, it's not. I don't. It's too. I'm bad at building real life Legos, even with the instructions. So like doing it in a game virtually is even worse for me.
Well, at least there was one game that let you just build beyond your wildest dreams, and that was Super Dungeon Maker. All right, let's move on to June, the final month that we are going to cover here. Lots of games came out in June. The biggest ones did not come to Switch. You know, the Street Fighters, the Diablos, the Final Fantasy 16s, those did not come to Switch. But Switch still got a decent run of games here. So I'm going to run down, I think this is the longest list of games that I have here. Etrian Odyssey Collection, Super Mega Baseball 4, Dordogne, Pikmin 1, Pikmin 2, Sonic Origins Plus, Crime O'Clock, Everybody 1-2 Switch, and Ghost Trick Phantom Detective. Do any of those stick out for you?
Yeah, Pikmin 1 and Pikmin 2. Um, Pikmin's awesome. More people should play it. I think if more people played it, it'd be a bigger franchise because it rules. A little frustrating they waited that long to put them out. I mean, I get that it was like right before the release of 4.
Mm-hmm.
But man, why couldn't we like the Switch has been around for so long and people have been wanting these games for so long. We got Pikmin 3 Deluxe, like why not drop the other two? Instead, now people have to play one. Presumably, if they want to get into the franchise, they're going to try to play 1, 2, and 3 in a month's time. But fortunately, these games are great. I'm currently playing through Pikmin 2 right now. I'm about halfway through, and it's so fun and charming. I think Pikmin 2 loses a little bit of luster because in the original release, all the treasures you collect were like real world items, like a Duracell battery or a Dr. Pepper can. And they have taken out all those real world references, probably because of licensing and copyright and all that. But the Nintendo references are still in there. So you'll find like a box of matches with Bowser on it. And your character's like, who is this weird turtle dude with spikes on his shell? It's a fun little adorable puzzle game. And I think more people should play it. I'm very stoked to have those on my Switch.
I started Pikmin 1 for the first time when these came out, just so I could give some brief impressions on the show. And I loved what I played, but I was like, you know what? I think I'm just going to wait for 4
That's fair.
because it seems like 4 is taking a lot of advancements. And we're going to talk all about 4 on next week's show because I think that is the release date, so we can talk about it freely. If you want to hear Kyle's early impressions, you can go back last week or 2 weeks ago, whatever. Just look on your podcast feed for the Pikmin 4 preview. I think it was last week's episode. So yeah, plenty of stuff to talk about with Pikmin right now. 1 and 2 came out last month. 4 comes out this month. So yeah, Pikmin 1 and 2 were very exciting releases that they basically just shadow dropped during the Nintendo Direct. But I would have also loved if they released it even just a couple months earlier so people would
Yeah.
have the chance to play through them before 4 because they didn't have a whole lot of runway with the way they released these.
They're short, but like if you're new to the game or new to the series and you want to try to get caught up, playing 3 games before the release of a fourth is daunting. Like
Mm-hmm.
overall, probably 20 hours of gameplay, but like it's 3 games. I wish they would have dropped them earlier.
So the ones that I want to call out here are Super Mega Baseball 4. Talked about MLB earlier. Super Mega Baseball 4 is just a very solid arcade style baseball game. And they mixed in real world legends with like the kind of roster of fake characters that they've cultivated over the course of their first 3 entries. And just customization galore. You can make your own logos. You rename all the players, create a team full of whatever players you want. Like I created a team full of like my favorite players from the 90s that weren't in the game already. So that was a lot of fun. Sonic Origins Plus, it's basically the same thing as the collection that came out last year, but it adds Knuckles into Sonic CD and Amy as a playable character in all of the other versions or all the other games. The Game Gear collection that is included is not great. Some of them have like a lot of frame rate drops. Some of them have really crappy sound, and I wish that like the ones that had the Master System versions, because the screen is a little bit wider, that's very important in a Sonic game, and I wish they would have included those instead of the Game Gear versions. I wish they just would have said it was the 8-bit collection instead of the Game Gear collection, because that would be a better way to play those games, especially on a console. So Sonic Origins Plus, my headline for my impressions piece was 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and I fully agree with that. I think it is a better overall collection than the original Sonic Origins, but there's some stuff that's like, it still isn't awesome.
Yeah.
And then the last one is Everybody 1-2 Switch. I gave my full impressions in the last episode, and I just think it's a fun party game. It's not the mess that the first 1-2 Switch was. And the more I think about it, the more I'm like, man, I wish I could have people over right now to play this game, because like I want to play more of it, and I want to be able to fully flesh out my opinions, and I want to just experience kind of more of the zaniness that comes from the mini games in there. So yeah, those are the games that we wanted to talk about. I did not include the early parts of July because we're just looking purely at the first half of 2023. But now that we've run down this, if you had to sum up Nintendo's first half of the year in like 1 or 2 sentences, how would you do it?
Probably the standout winner of 2023 so far, from I guess like from a first party standpoint at least. Actually, no, I'll say I don't know. I think the Switch is firing on all cylinders. That's an easy way to sum it up. Like I'm getting everything I want out of my Switch in the first half of 2023.
It has been a very strong first half for Nintendo. Are they the best first party developer right now, like in terms of like their output?
This year, for sure,
Or
I
just
think.
what about just best developer period right now? Like if you look at just the first half of 2023, is Nintendo and like their creations the best of any company?
I think so. One second. I'm pulling up my list of games I've beaten this year, but I think I want to say that. Oh gosh, come on.
'Cause, I mean, they have Fire Emblem, which is a first party title. They have Tears of the Kingdom, which is a first party title. Um, yeah, I mean, they one two Switch. You know, people like to poke fun at it, but it was fun. Kirby's Return to
Yeah.
Dreamland Deluxe.
Okay, yeah, I'm looking at my list of games I've beaten this year, and I can confidently say that Nintendo has won. Even just on the amount of games I've beaten this year, Switch is number one for me. Um, and then when you look at the quality, yeah, I think they're pretty unmatched. I mean, that said, Xbox's big hoorahs this year with Starfield and PlayStation is Spider Man, but also Xbox put out Redfall this year, and that was a huge dud. So
Hmm.
I don't think has Nintendo missed this year at all.
I mean, some people would argue that Everybody One Two Switch is not a great game. Like, I don't know what the
Sure,
Metacritic
but
score is,
were
but
we
like,
expecting it to be like I feel like it was either what people expected or maybe even better in some
I don't think
cases.
there's no games that I don't think that they've put out that we're just like really excited for, like people were for Redfall, and then it came out and people were like, oh, this kind of sucks.
Are there any that have done that recently? I guess Pokemon, depending on
Yeah,
where you
depending on what you
fall
want
with that.
to. Yeah, I mean that's probably the closest we had. Even though I do maintain that it was a very good game beneath all those technical problems, and
No, I agree.
I think
Yeah.
I gave it an 8 or 8.25 out of 10, and I do stand by that because like the technical problems, yes, egregious, but that game's like a 9 if it doesn't have the technical problems. So that almost
Oh
drops
yeah,
it a full point.
it was one of my favorites in quite a while. I liked it a good bit more than Sword and Shield.
Yeah. So look at Tears of the Kingdom, clear biggest game of the year so far.
Yeah,
What's second? Is it going to be Fire Emblem?
on Switch
Yeah.
for this year. For me, it's Fire Emblem. Yeah, from first party.
What about just overall on Switch?
I'm probably tied between Theater Rhythm and Fire Emblem, to be honest. Theater Rhythm, I just keep coming back to, but Fire Emblem's not really made for that, so it's tough. But yeah, I think those two are kind of neck and neck for me. But I do think Tears of the Kingdom is like probably standing above both of them.
Yeah, I keep going back to Metroid Prime Remastered as like my answer for like the second one.
Yeah.
And I know it's just like a remaster, but they went above and beyond for that one.
Do you think we're gonna
Um,
get 2 and 3 anytime
I
soon?
would love it. I mean, that seemed like almost like they were setting the table for it because people have been wanting the trilogy, but I think that's going to take a little bit more work because 3 at least was like, or no, 2 and 3 were both motion control games, right?
I think so.
Or
I'm
was
not
it
sure. I
just
haven't
3?
played them.
I forget because I never played them either. I forget which one was like the first Wii title. Um, but let's do a report card here for Nintendo.
Yeah.
For Nintendo exclusives, what grade would you hand out? Just the ones that are exclusive to Switch this year.
Ooh, probably. I mean, an A. I'm gonna give them an A for sure. Tears of the
That-
Kingdom alone gives them an A. I think.
yeah, they've had a great year so far. I'm also going to give them an A. But what about for third party support?
Hmm. I mean, I think, I think I could give them an A as well. There's no other than maybe like no, I can't. I can't think of any big third party games where I was like, I'm bummed this isn't on Switch because this is like a Switch game for me. What I want to play on Switch in the third party realm has come to Switch, and I've played it there,
I can
like
think of a
Theater
few.
Rhythm.
I can think of a few. One of them is Street Fighter 6. It's just bewildering to me that Capcom continues to kind of ignore the Switch and Nintendo with subsequent new entries. Like
Yeah, that's true.
it's very weird to me, especially since the SNES is where a lot of people really attach themselves to Street Fighter 2. And I asked the director and the producer if like if it's ever going to come back to Nintendo consoles, and they're basically like, "Yeah, we hope so." So it's like
Okay, well, they're the
that's a
ones that have
non-answer.
to
But
do that. Yeah,
well, I mean, they're not the ones that make the decision
that's
ultimately.
true. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I, Street Fighter 6 is the big one that sticks out to me. Obviously, I would love to have Final Fantasy 16 on Switch, but I think that would come at
Yeah.
a pretty significant cost to the game itself,
I
and
mean, it's
also it's a
also like
PlayStation exclusive.
exactly. Yeah.
Outside of that, maybe Diablo 4, because Diablo 3 is on Switch, so it feels a
Ooh,
little weird
actually,
that.
yeah, that's a pretty good shout out. Diablo on Switch would make a lot of sense. Hmm.
But there are
Okay,
a lot
yeah.
of games that are coming to Switch that, you're to your point, yes, they are very good additions to the library. We did get the Persona games that I mentioned before. It's not the first half of 2023, but we're getting Vampire Survivors, which is a big one that I've wanted for Switch for a long time.
Was Neon
Um,
White earlier this year, or was that
Neon
last year?
Neon White was last year.
Oh, okay, dang, I played it
Um,
this year, so
I'm gonna give them a B for third party support.
that's fair. Yeah, you named some good examples I didn't think of,
And
namely,
especially when we have Mortal Kombat 1 coming to Switch and Street Fighter 6 is not. And I know, like, I spent my last night playing Street Fighter 6 with a friend.
yeah.
And it's like, yeah, this is visually stunning, beautiful game. It runs like butter. But I feel like if Mortal Kombat 1 can bring a good port over to Switch, a Street Fighter 6 probably could as well.
And it's native too. Like we asked Ed Boon at SGF, and he said it's not a cloud version. So
Yeah,
yeah, and I think Mortal Kombat's probably pushing hardware more visually than Street Fighter. Both are very very pretty, but I don't know. I think with all the blood and guts and stuff, Mortal Kombat might edge it out visually.
maybe. Yeah. All right, let's single player games. What score would you give them?
Single player games, as in games that like have a single player mode, or like
Like, just like you think about like playing a game in as a single player, like
oh okay,
how good is
gotcha.
the experience of playing as a
Um,
single player on Nintendo Switch?
This year it's been an A for me. This has been I like one of my favorite years for Switch. I think of Fire Emblem Engage. I played that. I mean, there's multiplayer, but I dipped into that to make sure it was running and did its part for the review. But that's a single player game for me. Same with Theater Rhythm. Ritmos is a single player game. Strayed Lights single player. Tears of the Kingdom single player. Cosmic Shake. I didn't play it on Switch, but that's on Switch and it's a single player game. Yeah, a lot of good stuff for people that don't want to play with others, in my opinion.
I'm going straight up A plus.
Ooh,
Tears of the Kingdom, like you said, that alone gets them a high score. But then you have Metroid Prime Remaster, Kirby's Return to Dreamland Deluxe. It has co-op, but single player, it plays great. You mentioned Fire Emblem, again, has a multiplayer component, but the single player is kind of where it's at. Advance Wars 1 plus 2. Just so
oh,
many
Pikmin one and
amazing
two.
games.
Forgot about Pikmin.
Pikmin 1 and 2. I mean, there's just so many great games. Strayed Lights, you mentioned. The Final Fantasy Pixel Remaster games. Those are 6 enormous single player games.
Yeah,
Sonic Origins Plus. Geez, just so many great games you can play single player on Switch. And you mentioned Theater Rhythm Final Bar Line, Persona games. Yeah, like this is one of the best starts to a year for a single player experience that I can remember.
I agree.
So I'm giving it an A plus. But let's go to the other side of the coin here. Multiplayer games. What score would you give, or what grade would you give the Switch for multiplayer games?
Ooh, this one's tough because I'm not really like looking to play multiplayer on Switch necessarily. But perhaps that's because the offerings don't really sing too much in that regard. So I don't know. I think I'm a C. Uh, I look at namely like Fire Emblem Engage has multiplayer elements, but I don't think they're like necessarily that great, especially compared to the rest of the package. They're fine. They're there if you want them, but they're not like memorable compared to the single player stuff. And I
Hmm.
feel like that's a good description for a lot of multiplayer components in Switch games this year. It's there if you want it, but that's not why you're there.
Yeah, I mean that was kind of my thinking as well. See, there's just not a whole lot of like multiplayer centric experiences. Like I said, Kirby's Return to Dreamland Deluxe has co-op if you want to play it. I believe it's local only though. So
Mm,
that's kind of a detraction. Everybody 1-2 Switch, same thing. It's that you can't even play that single player. And I continue to say I had fun with what I've played of Everybody 1-2 Switch, but you need to play it locally. You can't play it online.
yeah.
Um, there's just not a whole lot there in terms of it. So I might even go C minus honestly with multiplayer.
Ooh, okay.
So let's go to this actually, because part of the first half of 2023 was the latest Nintendo Direct. And that essentially was setting the stage for the remainder of 2023. So I'm going to include that here. What grade would you give them for getting you hyped for the rest of the year?
Ooh. Do you have a list of stuff announced right now? I'm blanking. All I can think of is Mario.
We have the Pokemon Scarlet and Violet expansions. We have Sonic Superstars. We have Palia. We have Persona 5 Tactica. We have Splatoon 3's expansion. Detective Pikachu Returns. Super Mario RPG. We have the Batman Arkham trilogy. We have Fae Farm, Hot Wheels Unleashed 2, Mario plus Rabbids Sparks of Hope DLC, Pikmin 4, we've talked about that, Vampire Survivors, uh, the last DLC wave for Mario Kart 8, WarioWare Move
WarioWare.
It, and
Yeah.
Super Mario Brothers Wonder. So that's what we're
And
working with the second half of the year, according to the Nintendo Direct.
I would say that is I'm very excited. I've never played Super Mario RPG, but I've heard great things, and now I get to play it. Um, we just talked about how much we enjoyed Scarlet and Violet, so of course, new DLC is exciting, and I'm excited to see what that DLC is because I still don't really have a good idea of necessarily what it is. And then obviously, Super Mario Wonder is. I'm so excited for that game. I'm in the camp of the okay. I'm tired of the new Super Mario Bros. Art style, and this one looks really awesome, and I love how expressive Mario is. So like Wonder alone has me excited to be a Switch owner this fall. And then, yeah, we're getting things like Persona 5 Tactica and Pikmin 4 next week and all the other stuff I mentioned. I'm very stoked. Did we mention Detective Pikachu?
Yes.
Okay, I was going to say, I've not played the first one. Seems like you don't need to play this one. I'm very interested in checking this game out.
So what's the grade
Seems
for how they got you hyped for the second half?
great. I'll say B plus.
We're in line because that is also my grade. I was toying with an A minus, but I think that it's while Super Mario Brothers Wonder looks incredible, it feels like they're kind of missing that giant tentpole title outside of that, like a Tears of the Kingdom would be. But we already
Yeah.
got that this year, so we can't really complain. But I'm still going to say they've gotten me hyped a B plus, which is a very good score, by the way. Before people
Yeah.
come for my head. So that leaves us with the final grade here. What overall grade would you give Nintendo for its first half of 2023?
Taking all those into account, let's see. I will say an A minus.
Man, and that is right where I am as well. Taking into account the kind of the lack of multiplayer experiences, like in
Yeah.
any meaningful way, the super strong single player, the third party support which is slightly lacking but still pretty solid, and then the outstanding Nintendo exclusives. I'm going A minus as well. Super strong start to the year for Nintendo, and I'm excited for what the Switch is right now, and I'm hoping that even if this is kind of like the last hurrah for the Switch this year, I'm really excited for what this little console that shouldn't compete with the big boys in any way because of like how underpowered it is. Like by conventional wisdom, this system should not be competing with the powerhouses that are Xbox Series X and PlayStation 5. And yet they have the ace up their sleeve every single time of they happen to have the greatest developer of all time exclusively developing for them.
Yeah.
It also just happens to be the company that makes the console. So
Just
I
goes
think
to show games are king. You can have all that power, but if you're not making fun games, doesn't mean a thing.
yeah, well, it's not like the PlayStation and Xbox are necessarily
Yeah, that's
hurting for
fair.
games
Yeah, yeah,
either,
yeah.
but We just talked about those 3 major games that came out in June that did not come to Switch. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of our look back at the first half of 2023 for Nintendo. We are going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to get Wes's review of Oxenfree II. We will be right back after this brief musical intermission. There wasn't any real news this week, but we did have a new release in the form of a sequel to a beloved indie title. That new release is Oxenfree II Lost Signals, and Wes, you played and reviewed it for us. So that's what this second segment is going to be all about. So I guess, Wes, talk to me a little bit about what the elevator pitch is for Oxenfree II Lost Signals.
So Oxenfree II Lost Signals picks up 5 years after the original game. And it plays very similarly, which is to say, for the most part, you're here to experience a story. And there is gameplay. You're walking around and exploring this island. But everything you do is in service to hearing more of the story. While you're exploring, like in the first game, you have a radio that you can use to interact with things in the environment, because there's some strange sci-fi ghostly phenomena, apparition type stuff happening on this island. And that's, your job is to find out what's going on. So I won't speak too much on that. The new addition to Oxenfree 2, which is funny to say because it's not really that big of an addition, is a walkie-talkie, which lets you talk to other people on the island, which again, is just more narrative, more of the story, more of the characters. But yeah, so in Oxenfree 2, you play as Riley, and she's in a new place called Kamina, which is not far from the first game's setting of Edward's Island. And you're there on day 1 of your job as an environmental scientist, researcher type person. And you're supposed to go set up a transmitter on the top of the island, and you do that with your coworker, Jacob. And when you do that, things go awry. And if you're familiar with the first game, a very familiar, strange triangular prism appears over Edward's Island behind Kamina. And things start to go strange and bad, and you're going to spend the entire night with Jacob and Riley trying to solve this mystery and make sure that nobody gets hurt. There's cults, there's teenagers who are very desperate for their actions to take place, and there is a lot of heartfelt storytelling. If you haven't played Oxenfree, the thing to get across is it is not a very gameplay intensive game. If you're someone who doesn't like visual novels so much, then you might not vibe with this game as much. Mind you, it's a lot more hands-on than a visual novel, but in the same way a visual novel works, your primary motivation for playing this game should be to experience a story. If you're looking for gameplay, you're not going to have a good time probably. But if you're after a really good story, then Oxenfree 2 is a game you should play. You don't need to play the first game to enjoy it, but I would highly recommend it. 1, because that first game is good. And 2, there are some things that tie into Oxenfree 2.
Yeah. How rewarding is it that if you know the stuff from the first game that you're going to really get out of the second game?
It's definitely it's interesting. It's not super rewarding in a cameo-esque way. There are big elements of the first game that come into play here, but you don't need that knowledge from 1 at all to understand the impact. It's more of just oh yeah, I remember that name, or I remember this character or this event happening. So it's not going to be super impactful if you have played the first game. It was more of oh yeah, this is cool, rather than oh my god, I can't believe this.
And you talked about how kind of it's less hands-on with the gameplay.
Yeah.
What does the gameplay actually look like in this game?
So it's a watercolor-esque island area, and you just kind of walk around. You can climb up cliffs with a rope, or just by climbing. You can go into mines and all these different areas of the island, but you're really just walking around, and while talking to characters, you have dialogue options that appear overhead, and they're simple. They're quick and easy to hit. You can kind of be kind, or you can be sarcastic, or you can be straight up mean if you want. And those kind of flavor the narrative. I don't get the sense that they drastically change it. So it's more just about shaping who you want the protagonist Riley to be. But yeah, so you're just leisurely walking around. You're at your own pace. You're exploring how you want. You do have objectives, but yeah, you're just walking around and talking. I know it's not the most exciting pitch, but it's fun. I liked it.
Well, you talked about shaping the protagonist. How much player choice comes into the equation here?
So it's about the at the end of the story, I suspect that my Riley will be pretty similar to yours and to everyone else's. It's just that mine will be maybe more kind than yours, or maybe yours will be more mean. But you're not like drastically changing the story. There are no moments where it's like if you choose A, you're going down this path, and if you choose B, you're going down this path. There's a big choice at the end of the game that does have that, but the rest of the game is very like it's pretty linear, and then you can kind of just kind of color things up a little bit.
Now, I haven't played the first Oxenfree. Is that kind of how it played out in the first game as well?
The first game had multiple endings, and it also had a true ending. I'm making my way through a second playthrough of Oxenfree II. I don't get the sense there is a true ending like there was in the first game. Um, but yeah, I think the first game has a little bit more of the branching narrative type stuff you might expect.
And I'm assuming the true ending is the canonical ending in that gets carried forward into Oxenfree 2, or does it matter?
Uh, hmm. Without spoiling, I would say it doesn't matter too much. It's more of like the true ending to me kind of feels more of like an extension than a drastically different ending, if that makes sense.
And when I think about games like this that are like the story is such an integral part to the experience, I think of games like Persona 5. We talked about that in the first segment of the show, and how much I just longed for additional adventures with those characters. Like that's why I loved
Hmm.
Persona 5 Strikers. That's why I'm so excited for Persona 5 Tactica. Do you get that satisfaction from this where it's like, all right, I'm catching up with these characters 5 years later, right? And
Yes, yeah.
it's just kind of like it's scratching that itch of seeing what these characters are up to and learning kind of like the next chapter of their lives. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it's interesting because the way the story ends, there's like a definitive end to their narrative. So I'm not necessarily looking for like additional story beats beyond what happens in Oxenfree 2. But I really enjoyed hanging out with Riley and Jacob and then using the radio to talk to people. There's an old man on a boat out in the ocean who's scared because the ocean's getting quite fearsome and he wants you to check in on him every now and then just to make sure he's okay. There's a radio DJ who for a high school radio that like talks people through their relationship problems. It's little characters like that. So while I'm not like begging or asking for more story beyond the credits, I thoroughly enjoyed hanging out with these characters, which is why I'm playing it again. It's fun to exist with them and have these conversations within the confines of Oxenfree 2's story.
Oh, I meant primarily like Oxenfree 2 coming from Oxenfree 1. Like,
Oh, I see
is
what you're
this
saying.
provide you that? Like, is there any element of that where it's like, oh, cool, like seeing how this world has evolved or seeing how these characters have evolved?
There's a little bit of that, but not really. It's in a new setting. There are some returning elements, I'll say, but it wasn't like this big continuation that I wanted out of one. One kind of ended on a note where I was like, okay, I'm satisfied with this. I'm good to go. I don't necessarily need more. Which is why, honestly, going into Oxenfree 2 prior to Summer Game Fest, where I first played it, it wasn't even really on my radar. I liked Oxenfree, but it wasn't a series I was clamoring for more of, other than the fact that they told a good story, and I am always down for another good story. So yeah, I wouldn't say 2 feels like getting more of that world. It kind of just feels like another story happening in that world, and there are some familiar aspects to it. The way that it plays off of 1 is fun, and there's some heartfelt moments in that. But again, yeah, it's definitely doing its own thing.
And Oxenfree 1 came out in 2016, and in the time since, the studio was actually acquired by Netflix. And
Yeah.
do you happen to know any like was it evident the like the change in kind of like the way games are developed, or like does it feel like sometimes like a studio will get acquired and it's like, oh well, this studio is clearly, or the publisher that acquired them or whatever, clearly putting their stamp on this game? Does it seem like the development has kind of remained independent even though they have been acquired by this massive entity now?
Oh yeah, for sure. I think so. This game feels if I didn't know it wasn't published by Netflix, then like I would have never guessed that. It feels like the first Oxenfree in terms of charm and delivery and even the way it plays. And funny enough, I didn't mention this in my review because it's kind of a small thing, but like the loading is not great in the game. There's loading screens in it, which are only a couple seconds long, but in this day and age, I'm not used to loading screens really anymore. So like the Netflix budget that we assumed they would get doesn't necessarily translate to like a more masterfully made game or anything. It still feels like a Night School Studio game. And the only really imprint of Netflix I can feel is that this game's like definitely got that Stranger Things type vibe, like 80s summer camp esque story. But I don't think that's Netflix coming in as publisher and being like, you should do this. I think it's just the first game was already kind of in that territory. And then we've had 4 seasons of Stranger Things since. And maybe there's some like osmosis there. But I don't get the sense that Netflix mandated or requested or do anything really had an imprint. It feels like they knew Night School Studio was a good game and they wanted to bolster their Netflix gaming options. So they bought Night School and said, hey, keep making the games you make, which is always, best case scenario with the developer, I think.
Yeah, that and like if they could give them some more funding or whatever, like those are the
Yeah,
two big things. Like you want them to kind of leave them alone creatively, but also give them the money they need to accomplish their lofty goals.
for sure.
And also, the other thing that people may notice from Netflix in this is that it is included with your subscription.
Yeah.
If you're a Netflix subscriber, I guess you get the iOS and Android version for free if you just go into the app, and I guess there's a games tab, and you can download a copy of Oxenfree II to your phone for free.
Yeah,
So
I think it would be fine. I don't know. I don't like to play any game with the annoying like, use a digital touchpad on your phone to like move characters. But I don't think this game's doing anything so intensive where that would be a huge hassle. I'd still try to play it with a controller if I could, even if it means like hooking a controller up to my phone. But yeah, there's not really a reason to play this on any one platform. I think it would feel right at home wherever you play.
yeah, and if you do want to check it out, it's on PlayStation 5, Switch, PS4, and PC, in addition to those two mobile versions that I mentioned. What did you give the game?
I gave it an 8, which is very great underscore or pretty great. It's great. I gave it an 8. Yeah, didn't mean to rhyme so much, but yeah, I think it's a really good 8. It's not if you've played Oxenfree, it's going to feel like extremely familiar. Like it wasn't as innovative mechanically as I would have liked from a game that's a sequel to one that came out in 2016. But I got more great story, which at the end of the day is what I really wanted from a sequel.
And the last question I have for you, do they ever tell you what Oxenfree means aside from Ollie Ollie Oxenfree?
That is really funny you mentioned that because until this exact moment, I've never thought about that title. I don't know what Oxenfree means. I have no idea why they use that.
I'm just looking at this word sitting on my notes here, and I'm just like, what is this word?
Yeah, what the is it? Okay, all y'all Oxenfree is a catchphrase or truce term used in children's games such as hide and seek, capture the flag, and kick the can to indicate players who are hiding can come out in the open. That doesn't.
Maybe that
I have no
supernatural
idea.
occurrence that is coming out into I don't know. I have no idea what it could possibly mean, but that's a mystery for another day, I guess. We're going to take our final break of this show, and when we get back, we will be doing definitive ranking and eShop gem of the week. We will be right back. We are back, and it is time for definitive ranking, a recurring segment where we take a Nintendo topic and give our personal top 5 lists. We don't really go in depth on non-Nintendo anniversaries on this show, but I did notice that this weekend, Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic turns 20 years old. Now that game is available on Switch, but it's most known for like its other platforms. I think it was on the original Xbox, it was on PC. Those are the versions that stick out the most. And a lot of people consider that one of the greatest Star Wars games of all time. So to commemorate that without going super in-depth on the development of that game, Wes, this week I want to get your top 5 Star Wars games of all time. So you know the drill. Count it down from 5 to 1. Give me a sentence or two about each.
Yes, I feel like this is a tradition I have on the show now where my number 5 is kind of a cheating answer, but I'm just going to do it anyway. Number 5 for me is Star Wars Secrets of the Empire, which is technically a video game, but it is the very premium VR experience that they had at Disney Springs back in like 2016 or something.
Oh, wow.
You put on a headset and you hold like a toy gun that feels like a blaster, and you walk through like an entire warehouse, and it's basically you're in an Imperial base trying to escape from Darth Vader, and there's like, I don't know how they do it, but like when there's flames in your headset, you feel hot. There's like vibrations on your chest and all kinds of stuff. Very, very immersive. I loved it. It's a video game, although it's not one that we can access at all today. But that's my number 5, which is also a cheat.
All right.
Number 4 is Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. I forget what console this came out on, but I loved this
I think it was
game.
PS2.
Yeah, I love
PS2 and
this game.
Xbox.
Okay, yeah. As I probably played it on definitely PS2. I love this game. It's a classic like movie turned game thing where the story is pretty shoddily put together, but I had a really great time. The multiplayer was good fun. It was kind of like a fighting game but with Jedi, and also it has a alternative ending where at the end, instead of becoming Darth Vader, Anakin kills Palpatine and takes over right then and there, and I thought that was so cool.
Let me tell you
And
something about this game. I was so excited for Star Wars Episode 3 to come to theaters. So I bought this game because it came out before the movie. It just spoils the entire movie.
Did it come out before the movie?
Yeah, it was like a week before the movie. So I played through the entire thing, and I'm just like, oh, okay, so that's how that goes down.
That is so funny. They would never do that today.
Oh, no.
Because of social media. Can you imagine? Oh my God.
Like my teacher at the time, my government teacher, because I was in high school, she was the biggest Star Wars nerd I've ever known in my life. She was awesome, but she was a huge Star Wars nerd. And I remember like coming in, I was just like, oh yeah, here's this, and this. And she's like, why are you telling me this?
That's so funny. I love that. I did not know that. That is hilarious.
That was so stupid. But all right, number 3.
Number 3 is, I don't remember the name being this, but I looked up and it is the name. I don't know what I called it back as a kid, but Star Wars Super Bombad Racing.
Oh boy.
It it is like a, I don't even know how to describe it, kind of chibi-esque. Like it's big head Star Wars characters on tiny vehicles, and it was like a destruction derby, one half destruction derby type game, another half like racing. I can't imagine it holds up at all, but it came out
terrible.
It came out around the release of Phantom Menace, and I have such fond memories playing it with my brothers. And I'm just going to keep it that way. I'm never going to touch it again.
Number 2 is Masters of Terrascasi. But no, we actually did this for an episode of Replay a few years ago. And I just remember being in awe of how terrible it is. Sorry.
Well, my memories of it are great.
I'm sure they are.
There's a lot of Star Wars games I haven't played, which is why things like Super Bombad Racing end up on my list. But number 2, I think a lot of people would agree with, is Star Wars Battlefront 2.
The original one?
Yeah. Specifically, okay. I played it a lot on PSP, but it was obviously available elsewhere. I just think that's the best that multiplayer Star Wars can and has been. And I have very fond memories. It was the first game I downloaded on my Steam Deck using a very legal ROM that I already owned. So it was totally allowed. And it's still good fun. And there are servers still live today, which is a testament of how great that game is.
Yeah, that almost made my list, and I'll tell you why it didn't when we get to mine. But what's your number 1?
Number 1, not really, probably too much of a surprise, but Star Wars Jedi Survivor came out this year. One of my favorite games of the year. It's fantastic. And up until Final Fantasy 16, it had one of my favorite moments in all of video games, which I won't spoil, but if you've played it, you know it. It's from Jeddah, and it's an escape of sorts. And it's a blast. It had me like hooting and hollering in my living room. That game rules. I'm so excited to see what they do with a third game. And I'm especially impressed with it because I did not really care for Fallen Order that much. I really still don't really understand the hype around it. It never felt good to play to me, and the story was kind of lackluster to me, but Survivor improved in every way I would have wanted as a sequel.
Survivor is so good. Spoiler alert, that is my number 1 as well, but we're gonna go back to number 5 for me first, and this is kind of my Super Bombad Racing of my list. And this is more just a sentimental pick. Star Wars Shadows of the Empire. It was an N64 game, and objectively, I think it's not a great game, but I remember playing it with my friends. Like, I remember going to a friend's house and he had Star Wars Shadows of the Empire and being like, oh, there's a Star Wars game on N64. This is so cool. And it was like you were playing as like not Han Solo, flying the not Millennium
Yeah.
Falcon. And it probably isn't a very good game today. It probably wasn't even a very good game back then, but there's some cool stuff in it, and I loved playing it back when I was a kid. So I do understand where you're coming from with the Super Bombad Racing. I just wanted to give you some crap. Number 4, Star Wars Battlefront 2, but I went with the new one. And I'll
Oh,
tell you
okay.
why. It's controversial because that game was just loathful, if that's a proper word, when
Yeah.
it came out. I hated it when it first came out because it was so full of microtransactions. It was so pay to win, pay to customize your character, everything.
It's a
And
very important game for gaming history. Like it changed the trajectory of how microtransactions happens.
it really did. And EA, to their credit, went back and they corrected a lot of those mistakes. And if you go in and play Star Wars Battlefront 2 today, it is a completely different game.
Yeah.
It's substantially better. The visuals are incredible. Like playing through some of
Mhm.
those battles, I'm like, man, this looks so good. And when Rise of Skywalker came out, I went and bought like the sky the like the I don't even remember what it was called. It was like it wasn't called the Skywalker Saga edition or something, but it was like some special edition that had like all of the content. And I had a blast with that for a few weeks after Rise of Skywalker. And it's a very solid game now. It wasn't for a couple of years there. And Star Wars Battlefront 1, the first one in this second run of Star Wars Battlefront games, was very not good. And I'm glad that they made a lot of necessary adjustments following the launch of Battlefront 2, and it's a very solid game that I will champion in 2023.
Did you like the story in two? I feel like people don't talk about it too much.
It was fine. Like I
Yeah.
think I liked the character, but not really the story. I think that they could have done more with it. It was a little underwhelming in a lot of places, but it was overall not like the most offensive thing I've ever seen. Like a lot of people like to play off anything that they don't like in Star Wars as like
Yeah.
the end of the world. But yeah, it was inoffensive. It was forgettable, but I had a fun time with it. I did play through it. Number 3 for me, I used to like the Lego games a lot, but they've kind of become so homogenized. They
Hmm.
all feel like you're playing the same game, whether it's Lego Avengers or Lego Indiana Jones or Lego Star Wars. That's why I liked Lego Star Wars The Skywalker Saga so much. And that is on Switch. That is a game that they basically remade episodes 1 through 9 with this new style, with like new gameplay, and it's all one unified experience. And it plays well. I had a great time with it, and it's so cool to have it all in one package. I think they've also put out some Rogue One and Mandalorian DLC for it.
Yeah.
So it's one of my favorites for sure.
There's voice acting in it too.
There is, yeah, that is something that did not typically exist in a lot of these games. Now we're getting into the good stuff. I already spoiled my number 1 pick, but number 2, Star Wars Rogue Squadron on N64.
Ooh, okay.
Oh
Yeah.
boy, what a fun like dogfighting game. It's so wild to me that like my 2 favorite like aerial slash space combat games of all time are on the N64, and that is Star Fox 64 and Star Wars Rogue Squadron. I played this game endlessly. So much fun completing the missions that they give you. And I know they've put out other like space combat games in the Star Wars series. Most recently, I think Squadrons on
Yeah, in
PlayStation,
2020.
Xbox, and PC. But Rogue Squadron's always going to have a special place in my heart. And it was simple, but super fun and enjoyable. And I loved every single minute of it.
Yep.
And then Star Wars Jedi Survivors number 1. They learned all the right lessons from Fallen Order. I think I liked Fallen Order a bit more than you did, but I always felt like I liked it a bit less than everybody else.
Hmm.
But Star Wars
Yeah.
Jedi Survivor, I am full on aboard the hype train for this game. It's one of my favorite games of the year. It was my game of the year until Tears of the Kingdom came out, and it's going to be in my top 5 probably easily, unless all these games that we've talked about already that are coming out at the end of the year, the Spider-Man, the Alan Wake 2s, the Super Mario Brothers Wonder, if those all hit the way we hope they're going to hit, and Star Wars Jedi Survivor ends up outside of my top 5, that is going to be a special year for gaming.
Yeah, we're going to do like a top 20 for our Game of the Year issue.
Oh, God.
No way we can do 10.
All right, so we're going to wrap up with the way that we've wrapped up in a lot of the episodes of All Things Nintendo. That is the eShop Gem of the Week. Chance to give some shine to a game that might not otherwise get it. In this case, it's not getting it because it came out long before All Things Nintendo existed. It was a launch title for the Nintendo Switch. It is Snipperclips, Cut It Out Together.
Oh, that was a launch title? Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Did you ever play
Time.
this?
I didn't know, but I thought it was interesting.
It's a fun, it's meant to be a co-op puzzle, I guess kind of a platformer, but mostly just a puzzle game where you are these like papercraft characters and your job is to complete various tasks by cutting parts of your each other off and like form like, so if you have to like have a marble drop and then you have to form a ramp out of your characters, and that marble has to drop on one character, throw the marble to your other character, and then have it shoot up into the area that you need to get it to. You have to, sometimes you have to make the most precise cuts of these characters to make sure they're the right shape to complete the task. And when you finally do it, it is so satisfying. And also, I just love saying the word Snipperclips.
Yeah, it's
It's
good
a fun word to say. And they did put out DLC, which I did not check out, but I loved Snipperclips Cut It Out Together when it first came out. I would love to play more of it with like a co-op partner. So maybe one day I'll dust this off again. I did just reinstall it, and that's what made me think of bringing this up as an eShop gem. But if you missed Snipperclips when it first came out, or like you didn't have a Switch yet and you just kind of, it went under your radar, it's $20, but I would imagine it probably goes on sale a decent amount. And it, like I said, it came out in 2017. So check out Snipperclips. If you like puzzle games, it has a charming art style. It has really clever puzzle mechanics. And it's really satisfying to like punch through one of your teammates, almost like, you know, like a hole punch. And it changes the shape of them. And it's just so satisfying to do that and find the right shape to solve your puzzle. So that is my eShop gem of the week this week. Anything else before we wrap up here, Wes?
No, I think it's great to be a Switch owner.
It really is. So thank you for joining me for this episode, Wes. I really appreciate it.
Anytime.
And thank you so much to everyone for listening. Do me a favor, if you haven't already, throw All Things Nintendo a 5-star review and hit that subscribe button. If you want to get any questions or comments in, you can get in touch with me at allthingsnintendo@gameinformer.com or hit me up on Instagram at Brian Pichet. I'm also at Brian Pichet on both Blue Sky and Threads, so make sure you follow me there if you feel so inclined. And you can also join the Game Informer community Discord, which is a perk for subscribing to our Twitch channel, even just for 1 month. I'm in there pretty frequently interacting with everybody who listens to both this show and the Game Informer show, and also just the community at large. We've got a great community over there, so come join us if you would like to. Wes, tell people where they can find you online.
You can find me on GameInformer.com, writing stuff daily. You can find me on YouTube.com/GameInformer with some new gameplay todays. We put 2 up this week about some upcoming beat 'em ups if you like those kinds of games. And you can find me on everything, Twitter, Threads, Blue Sky, all the whatever stuff that we all have to sign up for now at LeBlanc West. I'm the same everywhere, so yeah, I don't know which one is going to be the winner after all this, but one day we will have just one social network probably, and I'll be LeBlanc West there.
It feels like Threads, if they can get their act together and make it the user interface better, they're the clear winner.
Yeah, but then the FTC is gonna have to step in because that's gonna be a monopoly.
Yeah, we'll see, because there's plenty of businesses that also do that. But that is our show for this week. Thank you again for listening. Take care. We'll see you next time.